So, Introduction to Starfleet Battles. And Introduction to Scenario 4. So, Scenario 4 of the learning scenarios. Let's see. Having played 3 scenarios, you are now ready for 2 major steps. The first is playing against a ship as powerful as your own. Yeah. Okay, scenario preview. You could skip. No, I'm not going to do that. Alright, I'm playing scenario 4 as given here. Rules for scenario 4. The greatest challenge of this scenario is to learn the energy allocation rules. Of course, this is the Cadet version. This is the heart of the game and the most important concept you must grasp. Each turn you must determine the energy produced by your engines and then spend or allocate it to perform various functions. Until now, your chief engineer has done this for you. Alright, energy allocation Cadet version. So the heart of the game is in the energy allocation rules. So players will determine how much power or energy is available and how to use it most wisely. There'll never be enough. Cannot spend energy you don't have, but you can use batteries to save some energy for later use. Energy is calculated and allocated on the energy allocation form. There are 2 of these included with the game. One is the Cadet energy allocation form, the one we're using here. And then, which is used in scenarios 4, 5, and 6, which comprise the Cadet game mentioned below. You'll need about okay. The other form is the standard energy allocation form. As you can see, it is somewhat more elaborate with several additional lines, and that's for scenarios 7 through 12. Okay. Each turn during the energy allocation phase, energy allocation phase, which is for the Cadet sequence of play, the first step. Each player, for every starship he controls, must fill out the next column of his energy allocation form. Okay. Specific instructions by line. Alright, so here we have line 1, warp engines. This is the amount of warp power available. Simply count the undestroyed warp engine boxes on the ship's SSD. In the Cadet game, this will be 16 for the Federation and Klingon ships in scenarios 4 and 5, and 16 for the Romulan ship in scenario 6. Impulse power. This is the amount of power available from the impulse engines. Again, simply count the number of undestroyed boxes. The Cadet cruisers each have 2. Reactor power. Reactor power. This is the amount of power from the nuclear reactors. The Federation and Klingon Cadet cruisers each have 2 reactor boxes. Here we go, marked APR for Auxiliary Power Reactor. On their SSD, I was wondering before what APR stood for, but it's Auxiliary Power Reactor. The generate reactor power. Total power. This is the total amount of power available from all sources other than batteries. At the start of a scenario, an undamaged Federation Cadet cruiser will have 20 units of power, a Klingon Cadet battle cruiser will have 20 as well, and a Romulan cruiser will have only 18. Assuming that the ship has not been damaged, line 4, total power, will have the same number each turn. Alright. 5. Batteries available. This is the number of batteries holding power that is available for use. All 3 Cadet ships have 2 batteries. Batteries discharged. Line 6. This is the number of batteries previously used. The total of 5 and 6 lines 5 and 6, will always equal the number of undestroyed battery boxes on the SSD. At the beginning of a scenario, the batteries will all be charged. Careful players, this is interesting, careful players will save their batteries until the ship is heavily damaged and use them to fill in temporarily for destroyed engines. Skillful players, however, use their batteries constantly for that one additional unit of power that can be critical. Batteries destroyed in combat are presumed to have been those previously discharged, if any such batteries are available. Alright, line 7 is not on the Cadet energy allocation form. Okay, 7 is life support, not used here. It's assumed to be taken care of still with scenario 4. Fire control scanners, same, not used in the Cadet game. Phasers, let's see, yeah, phasers line 9. Energy for phasers is explained, okay, in the rules below, okay. Line 10, torpedoes. This line is used for photon torpedoes, plasma torpedoes, disruptor bolts, and other heavy weapons. The allocation of energy for each launching tube or system box is recorded separately on one line here. The specific method of allocation for each weapon type is covered, okay, within the rules for the weapon types. Shields. All right, for the cadet game, shields require energy, but your chief of engineer has already taken care of that. Line 12, general shield reinforcement, not used in the cadet game. Reinforce shields, not used in the cadet game. Now we go to line 14, right there, energy for movement. Energy is required to move the ship. This energy can come from either warp or impulse engines. No more than 1 unit of power can come from impulse engines, and it will provide 1 movement point regardless of the size of the ship. Warp energy provides movement at a rate for the 3 cadet ships of 1 point of energy to 1 hex of movement. So for example, to move it at a speed of 8 would require 1 point of impulse power and 7 points of warp power, or 8 points of warp power altogether. There's a limitation on changing speed. You cannot, in scenarios 4 through 6, increase your speed by more than 8 points between one turn and another. Okay, 1 turn. This assumes that you have the power available. Obviously, you can slow down by any speed you want. For example, the Constellation moves at speed 5 on the first turn. On the second turn, it could select any speed between 13, which is 8 more than 5, and 0. There's no requirement in the rules the ship has to move at top speed every turn, and of course higher speeds will make it harder to turn. Yeah. Okay, damage control. Line 15, not used in the cadet game. Recharge batteries. There we go, line 16. Energy allocated on this line will recharge previously discharged batteries. Here we go. I was wondering why we even bothered with discharged batteries, but that's because we can recharge them. For example, let's say on turn 1 you wanted to use 22 points of power, so you use the 20 from the engines and reactors and both batteries. On turn 2 you can use no more than 20 points of power as the batteries are empty. You might spend 2 points on this line to recharge the now empty batteries. Okay. 17, 18, 19 lines are not used in the cadet game. And then total power used is line 20. This line is used as a final mathematical check to make sure that you have allocated the correct amount of power. This number cannot be more than the total of line 4, total power, and line 5, batteries available. Okay. A ship is never required to expend all its energy, but any unused energy on a given turn cannot be used later. It was never generated. Your engineer simply reduced the output of the engines. All right, batteries discharged. There we go. Line 21. Okay. This is a record of the number of batteries which were discharged on the current turn. It is used to adjust lines 5 and 6 on the next turn. This number will be the difference between lines 20, total power used, and 4, total power. If line 20 is larger. If line 20 is larger, okay. If line 20 is smaller than or equal to line 4, this number will be 0. Keep in mind that each battery holds one point of power. Except when specifically stated to do so, energy does not carry over from turn to turn. Okay. Now we have power requirement rules from previously learned rules sections. Okay. This is important. Energy for phasers. It costs 1 point of power to fire a phaser 1 or phaser 2. In later scenarios, the phaser 3 will be used. It costs 1/2 point of power for a ship to fire a phaser 3. Shuttlecraft do not use energy allocation. They can fire their phaser 3 once each turn. Phaser capacitors. All ships have a phaser capacitor. This is a special storage battery that is equal in capacity to the total amount of power required to fire each of the ship's phasers 1 time. For example, the Federation Cadet cruiser with 3 phaser 1s has a phaser capacitor rating of 3. Energy can be held in the phaser capacitor from one turn to the next and can be withdrawn during any impulse to fire the ship's phasers. It can never be withdrawn for any other purpose. This energy can be withdrawn for any phaser. Could be used over a period of 3 turns to fire the same phaser 3 times. Energy can be added to the phaser capacitor during the energy allocation phase, but note that the total energy in the capacitor cannot exceed the capacity of that capacitor. If a phaser is destroyed, an equivalent portion of the phaser capacitor is also destroyed. Naturally, players may consider the uncharged elements to be destroyed first. Okay. Alright, example. I think I'm going to need this example. This rule set has a nice number of examples. I've not been going over all of them. The Federation Cadet cruiser has a capacitor of 3. Is that listed anywhere? Damage control, movement cost, X-dam. I don't see. I don't see it. The player allocates 3 units of power to the capacitor at the start of the first turn. During that turn, 2 phasers are fired, so there is still 1 unit of power in the capacitors. On turn 2, only 2 units can be added to the capacitor, as it can only hold 3 and already has 1. During turn 2, only 1 phaser is fired. On turn 3, the player allocates no energy to the phasers, but could still fire 2 of them because there are 2 points remaining in the capacitors. Okay. That's just something, I guess, when I'm learning the game to just think through each turn. Energy for disruptor bolts. And we will have a Klingon Cadet battle cruiser in scenario 4, so disruptor bolts are fired by the following procedure. 2 units of energy are allocated for each bolt which is to be fired. The bolts are an energy discharge and as such cannot be held from one turn to the next. Any bolts for which energy has been allocated but which have not been fired by the end of the turn are lost. Okay. Specifically different than the phaser capacitors. Okay. Energy to fire disruptor bolts can come from any power source. Disruptor bolts are fired during the direct fire weapons step of any impulse. There is no counter for a disruptor bolt. Their effect is determined by the die roll and recorded immediately. A given disruptor bolt may not be fired more than once per turn. Okay. Arming photon torpedoes. And we have those. We have photon torpedoes here with the Federation Cadet cruiser. To arm a photon torpedo, two factors of warp energy must be allocated to a specific photon torpedo tube on each of 2 consecutive turns. The second turn may be the turn of firing. The Federation Cadet cruiser, which has 2 photon tubes. So to arm a photon torpedo, 2 factors of warp energy must be allocated to a specific photon torpedo tube on each of 2 consecutive turns. Second turn may be the turn of firing. The Federation Cadet cruiser, which has 2 photon tubes, would have to expend 4 units of warp energy on each of 2 consecutive turns to fire a full spread of 2 torpedoes. Note that since APR power cannot be used for movement, and since only 1 unit of impulse power can be used for movement, a Federation ship arming photon torpedoes would be limited to a maximum speed of 14 because 4 of its 16 points of warp power are going to the torpedoes. The remaining 12 points, plus 1 point from impulse power, give a top speed of 13. Holding armed photon torpedoes. If the arming of photon torpedo has been completed on a given turn and the torpedo is not fired on that turn, then the ship must allocate 1 unit of energy for that tube for each turn until the torpedo is fired. Okay. If this holding energy is not paid, the torpedo crew will eject the torpedo harmlessly into space. Another example. Good. But I'll skip it. Energy requirement. The 4 points of energy to arm a photon torpedo must all come from the warp engines. The 1 unit of power to hold it may come from any source. The 1 unit of power to hold it may come from any source. Okay. There's a comment. Good stuff. Damage allocation. I should go over this for scenario 4 here. Count all damage that penetrates a single shield on one step of a single impulse as 1 volley. Note the damage from drones and or plasma torpedoes and damage from direct fire weapons is resolved separately because it happens at different points in the impulse. Each time internal damage is scored, the first point must be scored on a weapon if one is left, if there's one left. The second point must be scored on a warp engine box if one is left, and the remaining points can be scored on any internal boxes, but not other shield boxes and not the drone rack ammunition track. The bridge cannot be destroyed. When there are no boxes, including excess damage boxes, remaining except the bridge, the ship is destroyed by one more damage point. Okay, I guess I will have robot ships, because I'm playing solitaire, I guess. So, for a robot ship, do not score... Okay, so... I will have this. Okay, do not score the extra damage on warp engines or weapons unless there are no other boxes remaining. Then score them on warp engine boxes first. Each damage point scored on a warp engine reduces the speed of the ship by 1 point for the rest of the scenario, beginning at the start of the next turn. 12 damage points scored on warp engines will bring the ship to a halt. This approximates the energy allocation process. It is a little too generous for the robot ship, but this offsets some of the limited aspects of the robot ship's system. You know, maybe I won't play with robots ships. Maybe I'll just play both sides. Okay, but then there's a section on the robot opponent, and then we get to scenario 4. So, again, the big thing, energy allocation. I'll be using the Cadet energy allocation form, and then I'll finally getting to actually allocating damage. It says rules from previous scenarios. These scenarios use the same movement, turning, combat, and phaser rules from scenario 1, the shield, seeking weapon, and photon torpedo rules from scenario 2, the impulse, shield, drone, and disruptor rules from scenario 3. Okay, and the rules for this scenario is given above. Yeah. Do not use the damage allocation rules from scenario 2. Yeah, obviously. So now I have the new damage allocation rules that I just went over.